Oh, wow, that was a big fish. Wow. Welcome back, guys. On today's video, I'm going to try to answer a question that was asked by a subscriber. The question is, how do you know what bait to throw when? All right. Now, I'm going to focus this video on bass because, you know, if you're fishing for brim, bluegill, shell crackers, crappie, you have limited amounts of baits. You're going to throw a crappie jig, you maybe change the color and the size. You're going to throw a minnow, worm, cricket. You're limited on options. Bass, on the other hand, you have a lot of options. So I am going to take the assumption that this was the references. When you're bass fishing, how do you know what to throw? So I have the perfect example today. I came out here to fish a different lake today, and I realized that the road to the lake has flooded. We've had a lot of rain the last few days. The entire road is flooded. I couldn't even get down it in my truck. I was worried about the lake was probably overflowing anyway. So I just decided to come to this one. I can already tell you what I know about this lake. This is a state lake. This is cut off from any other water source, which tells me that the fish that are in here are the only fish that are in here. If this was connected to a river system, the river could flood and restock it every year. So this is limited to whatever fish are in here. It's not very big, which means it's probably not going to be very deep. I saw a lot of trash on the bank, which tells me there's a lot of fishing pressure for people fishing the bank. So it's heavily pressured. It's a state public lake. It's not very big. That tells me most likely the bass are going to be relatively small. Okay, so I know that off the front end. I'm not coming in here expecting to catch a bunch of 4-pounders. That means lower your bait size. You might can catch them on a bigger bait. That's not to say you won't, but I'm saying, like, if you're coming to a lake like this, you need to bring plenty of smaller baits to throw, anticipating that the fish that you're going to be fishing are going to be smaller. Okay, so here in the south, a lot of our lakes, the bass feed on crawfish. So good crawfish baits are always good around this region. A lake like this, a state lake in the state of Tennessee, the primary food source is going to be bluegill and bluegill hatch, right? So the bass are going to be feeding on bluegill. The state of Tennessee does not do a very good job of stocking lakes with like threadfin shad, where if you go over to Arkansas, a lot of their lakes are stocked with shad. And so that opens up a whole different group of baits that are optional in that scenario. But here, it's going to be whatever's local: crawfish, frogs, and bluegill. That's your 3 primary food sources in this lake. I've never fished here, but I can tell you that's the 3 food sources. Now, I'm starting off today with a frog, only because I'm looking against the bank. We had a lot of rain last night, and so a whole lot of extra water dumped into this lake. And I am assuming that the bass have pushed all the way up in the cover. They're getting all that fresh food that's washing in. If the bass aren't, what they're feeding on is up there close, getting those fresh nutrients from all the stuff washing into the water. It's washing all the bugs in. The bluegill are up there. The frogs are up in there. And so I'm going to go down this bank throwing this frog first, and then I'm just going to go through the wheels of making an assumption of a few baits, and as I rule them out, I will switch to the next bait. So the thing about topwater fishing with bass fishing, I always do this first when I'm here in the morning. I go through topwater baits first, because you could screen a lot of baits really fast, because if they're going to bite topwater, you're going to see it really quick. You don't have to make 500 throws to tell if this is going to work or not. If I make several throws in here and I can't get a bite, I'm going to switch to another bait real quick. Oh, I had a fish right there, but he wasn't big enough to get it. I'm too busy talking to you guys and I'm getting a fish. So clearly that fish was not big enough to get this frog, and I wasn't paying enough attention. See, bit it twice. That tells me the fish are really small, so I might have to downsize. If the bass are too small, it's really hard to get them on a frog, even if they're biting. But we'll see. I'll give him another shot. The wind's blowing me right in this direction. All right. I've gotten several bites right there on a frog. These fish cannot get this bait. I'm gonna switch baits and see if I can't pull a fish out. All right, so I was getting the bites on a frog, so I'm gonna switch to this little popper. And the reason why I'm switching to this popper is because it's very similar to a frog with its action and color, but it has two treble hooks. And the two dangling treble hooks will make it much easier to hook the smaller bass, right? The big bass don't have a problem getting the frog, but this lake is not very big, and so if it's full of little fish, I need to throw a bait that little fish can get. Okay, so I've thrown this through there and I know there's bass in there and I can't get one to hit. So they like the frog, but they're too small to eat the frog. It's overcast, it's windy. It says bladed bait all day long is what this says. So maybe topwater's not the best option, or at least the topwaters that I'm throwing. So I am switching to a spinnerbait. I just got white because that's the one that was in the floor. I already had it available. Okay, so I had a bite on a frog. The fish are too small to eat the frog. I tried a popper, they don't want the popper. I don't know what's different. There's something about the popper they didn't like. So I'm gonna go subsurface. I know there's bass right here. I saw a couple of them hit the top and I had 3 bites on a frog. So I'm gonna switch over to this bladed bait because it's overcast and it's windy. Let's see if I can't catch a fish here. There he was, got him first cast. Oh, he was little bitty. That's what it is, he's little bitty. I may have to downsize my spinnerbait. We'll see. But I got one first cast. There, that's the 3rd hit I've had. I just got hit right there. I've gotten hit 3 times on this spinnerbait. I think this lake is full of little bass, and it's gonna be really hard to get them. Look, I got hit again. I got that one. This is what this lake's full of. I'm probably gonna have to downsize my bait. But that's the first fish I've caught. I am not getting hit on the spinnerbait anymore. I'm getting hits, but the fish aren't getting it. And I know that they were hitting topwater, so I'm gonna try and find a topwater that they will hit. Okay, I'm going with a whopper plopper, and that's because this is a bluegill pattern. This is meant to simulate a bluegill. And I know that bluegill are a primary food source in this particular pond. And so I'm gonna see if I can't land one on this, or at least get one to bite it. If I can get it to run proper. This one's kind of spinning in a circle. That's a crazy throw right there. If I get a fish, I'm gonna have to bring him through a bunch of stuff. Ooh, I got him too. Oh, he's not very big. Well, the whopper plopper did pull one out. Bluegill pattern is a thing. It's just these fish are so super tiny. I could downsize my bait and probably catch a lot more, but I'm trying to target a little bit bigger fish. Look at it right there. That's nuts. They're hitting the whopper plopper. This bait is just a little too big. Well, you guys aren't gonna be able to see that. It's around a bunch of bushes. There he was, got him. Look, hey, that's a better fish. Oh, yeah, he just got me in a tree. So, I found the fish that's in this pond. There went one behind me, hit right against the bank. I heard him, I didn't see him. But they're super tiny bass, guys. These are not good quality fish, but this is the lake that I have because I can't fish the one I wanted to because of the amount of rain we had. I'm surprised I'm catching fish this small on this whopper plopper though. There he was. Hit it. Oh, we got it that time. They're super tiny. Super tiny. But the whopper plopper is putting them down. All right. So I can probably catch these guys all day out here. This lake is a consolation prize, I guess. I drove over an hour from the house to come out here and fish a particular lake that I can't get to, so I'm stuck here with these little fish. But hey, I could be sitting at the house watching Netflix, and to me this is far better. So when going through the baits that you've got, I go through early in the morning. I look for topwater baits first. I'm trying to get all my topwater out of the way, because the first couple of hours of the morning is about the only time the topwater really works, unless you have really good weather conditions, which that's a topic for another day. But topwater baits in general are really good for that first hour in the morning, and a lot of lakes they turn off after that and the fish go down. It's not always the case, but in general that's how it is most days. If you can catch them on topwater, that's by far the best, because you can fish most topwaters pretty fast. You cover a lot of ground, and it's fun. Who doesn't like to fish topwater? So start with your topwater, then go subsurface. And then once you found a bait that they'll bite, then you can experiment with colors. If you have a fishing partner, that's the best case scenario, because sometimes they want chrome, sometimes they want white, sometimes they want orange. I don't know. Depends on the lake that you're fishing. So establish a pattern of food that they're feeding on, right? And then expand from there. Then pay attention to your presentation. You have to reproduce whatever it was that you did to catch that first fish, right? Remember to do that. And I can tell you, so Sean and I went and fished a lake a couple of weeks ago. It was called Spring Lake, and it's in Mississippi. Neither one of us had fished the lake. Our strategy was very simple. We had 4 bass rods. I had 2, he had 2. We put on 4 completely different topwater baits on all 4 poles. We got to the lake was coated in grass on the top. It was only on the top, it was floating. I caught the first fish on a buzz bait, and then I caught the second fish on a buzz bait, and none of the other topwaters were working. But the grass was bogging down the blade. The blade was catching the grass. So we established that the fish will bite a buzzbait. They didn't want a frog, they didn't want a whopper plopper, and they didn't want a Zara spook. That was the other 3 topwaters. So we just did basically trial by error. We just threw a bunch of baits at them until we figured out which one would work. Now we knew the buzzbait was working, and it was a white clacker buzzbait. Now the grass got in the way. So what I did is I stepped down to a spinnerbait, because that's subsurface. It allowed me to fish the same style bait, but get below the grass where the grass wasn't a hindrance on me. It caught on my line, but it didn't catch on my bait, and so it wasn't that big a deal. Now, I ended up catching way more fish than Sean that day. And so, I don't know if you've had days like that where you're fishing right side by side with a buddy and he's catching all the fish and you're not. I'm here to tell you, it's not because they're lucky. It's not because they're a better fisherman. There is a reason why that person is catching more fish than you. And I have been on both ends of that spectrum. I have been the guy that's not catching any, and I've been the guy that's always catching them and you're not catching anything. And there's always a difference, however subtle it is, of why that is. It could be, I'm fishing with 6-pound line and you've got 12-pound line and they're line shy and they're shying off your line. It could be that my smaller line is allowing my bait to go deeper. It could be that I'm retrieving my bait slower than you and the fish want a slower retrieve. It could be that I'm reeling faster than you and they want it higher in the water column. And that's exactly the scenario that Sean and I found ourselves with. Is we're fishing this lake. I'm catching way more fish than him. We're throwing the same baits. But his reel, I fish loose speed spools, because these are like, I think these are like 7 5-and-1s, and he was fishing like a 5-and-1. And so you need to know the speed of your rod, right? And so the critical thing with bass is bass always feed up, right? You want to have your bait above them. This was a really shallow lake. And so if you're not burning your bait, you're not above the fish. And what was happening with Sean, the reason why he was catching fewer fish than me, is his retrieve on his reel was causing his bait to go below the fish. Where I'm fishing above him, he's fishing below him. And that This much depth range is all that it varied. My bait's up here, his bait's down here, but that was enough of a difference in presentation where he wasn't catching near the amount of fish that I was. He still caught fish, he just didn't catch very many. And all it had to do with was presentation. So if you tie on a bait, you get a bite, don't change the bait, change the presentation. Fish it faster, fish it slower, reel it and stop it, reel it and stop it, jerk it kind of erratically, whatever you got to do to try to trigger that response out of that fish. Because sometimes it's not as simple as, oh, he's got the better bait. No, you can put on the same bait or one similar and do the same thing. So if you watch my crappie video a couple of weeks back, Amy and I are bass fishing and she stumbles up on a crappie throwing a 4-inch swim bait. So we cut swim baits down to size because we needed a smaller presentation for crappie than we do for bass. So we downsized our baits manually. I was catching crappie, she wasn't. I was catching crappie and bass and everything, and she was catching a fraction of the fish that I was. And I was watching her retrieve, and she was fishing much faster than me. Crappie are a sluggish fish. They need something slow and laid in their face. They're not an aggressive fish most of the time. They don't want to chase something. So you pretty much have to put it in their mouth for them to bite. And so I'm reeling really slow, barely creeping. The bottom of the lake was covered in grass. And so there's only about this much water between the grass and the surface. Her bait was up here at the top of the water column because she was reeling it in real fast. I kept my bait as slow as I can go and went right over the grass, and I was catching way more fish. And all it was presentation. So experiment with your presentation. If you're not catching them with what you're throwing, it might not be the bait, but the way that you're retrieving it, right? Cool. Let's go catch another couple of fish. Oh, wow, that was a big fish. Wow. That was a much better fish than what I've been catching. Not a lot better, but he hit this thing like a hammer. That was nuts. He missed the bait. Okay, guys, so for the sake of the video, I know I can probably catch another 15, 20 bass on this whopper plopper, but instead, I'm gonna further prove the whole bluegill pattern by picking another bluegill pattern bait and throwing it in the water. Okay, so this is the ultimate bluegill bait. That looks exactly like a bluegill. See if I can hold this up close enough for you guys to see it really well. It doesn't get any more bluegill bait than that. There he is, got him. See? So, this bass was barely big enough to get that thing. And so this is not the best bait for this lake because the fish aren't big enough really to get it. But Sleeper Gill pulled one out. I only threw about 8 times. One thing I've noticed about this lake is the same as in big lakes, is all the fish are piled up in the same little area. There's a few little sporadic little ones, but the bulk of the fish that I've caught today are in little isolated pockets. Like there's a whole bunch of fish right back here. So I'm fixing to take this bait down here where all them fish were and see if I can't pull one out of here. Got him. Got him out of the other side of the boat. So you can see this guy choked it, that sleeper gill. So this proves the bluegill pattern. So I'm going to take this sleeper gill off. It's obviously working. It proves that the bluegill pattern is the way to go in this pond. And I know that because I know this pond is not stocked with shad. And so I'm also hearing frogs back here, which means this should be a frog pond, which you saw I had a few bites on a frog early this morning. And the main thing is these bass are not big enough to eat it. But I'm gonna throw it for a minute just to show you that I can catch one on it. Got him. All right. That one's a fat one that's on the bed. Its belly is swole. But it took a pretty good size, I say good size, for the pond I'm fishing, it's a pretty good size. Took that bass to get that frog. But again, that's two different bluegill patterns and a frog pattern that works at this pond because I know the food source that's here, right? Okay, so now the third food source that I mentioned was a crawfish. So I'm fixing to find a crawfish imitator if I brought one. Yeah, I got some creature baits if nothing else. I'm fixing to put that on and catch a fish. Okay, so third food source that I had pinned for this lake was a crawfish. This is a Rebel Crawl crankbait. And so I'm fixing to throw this in here. This is probably going to be one of the better baits because it's got the small treble hooks. It's perfect for these size bass. But I'm fixing to catch one on this. There he is. Oh man, he bit it hard and missed it. I don't know how he missed it. There he is, got him. See? It took 4 casts to get the first bite, and I threw back in there and got him. But you can see the Rebel Crawl pulled him out really quick. But again, guys, they call it, you'll hear the old timers say, match the hatch, match the hatch. Basically, it just means match whatever the food source is at the time that you're fishing. And in this particular pond, there's 3 primary food sources: bluegill, frogs, crawfish. You saw I caught one on a frog, had several blow-ups. The fish are just a bit too small. I fished 2 different bluegill pattern baits, caught fish on both of them. Switched to a crawfish, now I'm catching them again. Picking the right bait is not complicated. It's knowing that it's not just the bait that you're picking, it's the presentation, it's the where you're fishing it, it's the time of day that you're fishing it, it's the weather conditions that you're fishing. If you only go fishing on bluebird days and you sleep in and don't go till 10, you know, that may be part of the reason why you're not catching many. Personally, for bass fishing, I get on the lake as early as I can get on the lake. And then if I can't fish early in the morning, I fish late in the afternoon. I do not fish through the middle of the day. You'll see professional bass tournament people talk about catching fish during the middle of the day. And yes, you can, but most of those guys are fishing offshore with $50,000 worth of electronics in their boat, catching them out in the middle. When you talk about presentation, think of the bait you're throwing. So I'm gonna start and stop this thing, because crawfish don't just swim in a straight line like a bluegill. You can crank it in just normal, but if you're not getting many fish, change the presentation. Slow your reel, speed up your reel. Speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, stop. Do different things until you figure out what's gonna make these fish bite. Right? There he was, got him. So on that fish right there, I just reeled it and stopped it, reeled it and stopped it. And that's more of the way a crawfish would actually swim is more erratic. If you've ever seen one on TV swimming, they're very erratic. But with this bait, well, I hung the bush, but you can reel it in just slow, you know, because it's got a really strong wobble. But if you're not getting the bites, you can just kind of jerk your rod and keep it moving, but it's start and stop and start and stop. And sometimes that erratic motion will trigger a fish to bite. And so if you know you've got a bait that should work in the lake that you're in, change your presentation. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with changing your bait. It's the way you're fishing the bait. There he is. Oh man, I lost him. Right there. Not a bad fish. There he was. Another one hit. Oh, I got him. That's a little guy. Again on that rebel crawl. There he is. Oh man, I lost him. Dang. They sure are hitting short. They should not miss this bait. Uh-oh, I heard a fish up in there. Ooh, I got him. As soon as it hit the water. Ooh, not a bad fish. This is the best fish of the day. Right here at the ramp. Best fish of the day. Wow. Again, that was on that rebel crawl. Not a very big fish, but the pattern is holding. Frogs, bluegill, crawfish. It's that simple. Anyways, I hope this video helps some of you. I got a question for you. Do any of you have a bait that works in every lake, no matter the circumstance? What is your go-to bait that works everywhere you go without fail? I don't really have any. I would say a Kitech swim bait is probably about as good as I'm gonna get. I could take a white or a shad colored or a green colored Kitech swim bait, and it'll work in almost every lake. I'm pretty sure I can catch fish on it in here. That would be my go-to bait. What's your go-to bait? You got one? Leave it in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys next time. Y'all have a good one.